everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore, and I first and foremost want to say thank you. Thank you for being here and supporting local independent bookstores. We would not be here, especially over the past year, without you. We know that Tattered Cover is normally a communal space where we like to gather for events and, honestly, just to smell the books. And we can't do that in the same way right now, but we're a virtual community and you're a part of that. So thank you for being here. For those of you who may be joining us who are outside of Colorado, Tattered Cover Bookstore is a independent bookstore in the Denver metro area where we have 4 locations right now and soon to be 5-ish, maybe. We'll see. We've been teasing that Westminster location for a while, but COVID. Right now, though, only 3 of our locations are open. As you know, most of you know, our historic Lodo location is moving, which is very exciting. We're in the middle of that move, and our new location, which is going to be called McGregor Square, is opening up just 4 blocks from the old location, and it's going to be in about mid-May or so. That's the timeline, but construction. We'll keep you guys updated on that, but you can always sign up for our email newsletter or follow us on social media for any of those updates. If you want to come visit us, you can visit any of our other locations. As long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, you can come shop for about 90 minutes or so. But if you want to shop online, stay in your pajamas, or if you don't live in the Denver metro area, you can always do that and get all your bookish needs at tatteredcover.com. Tatteredcover.com/event is where you can figure out all of our upcoming events that we have, like Tess Gurney, the poet, who's our next event that we have coming up. She's in conversation with Teresa Archer and celebrating her new collection, The Apricot Memoirs, and that's going to be Wednesday the 7th. But again, tatteredcover.com/event, so you can see all of those coming up and registering for them. So I want to also let you know that closed captioning is enabled on this video. There's a black bar down at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. Click that button and closed captioning is enabled should you want it or need it. And I believe that's all my housekeeping things, but I just want to once again stress the thank you because Tattered Cover turns 50 this year, and we would not have made it this long without your support. We wouldn't be able to have awesome authors like the one that we have tonight. I'm very excited and honored to introduce you guys to Martha Hall Kelly. She's the New York Times bestselling author of 3 books. Her debut novel, international blockbuster Lilac Girls, and the prequel Lost Roses, and the book that we're celebrating tonight, Sunflower Sisters. Never an enthusiastic history student in school, Martha developed a passion for when she discovered the long-buried story of how Caroline Faraday, a New York socialite and philanthropist who championed the cause of a group of Polish women, nicknamed the Rabbits, and experimented upon by Nazi doctors at the all-female Ravensbrück concentration camp. Martha is a former copywriter and lives on a hay farm in Litchfield County, Connecticut with her husband, Michael, their practically human dog, Oliver, 2 beavers, and several muskrats. She has journalism degrees from Syracuse and Northwestern universities, and her books have been published in 49 languages. Her latest novel, Sunflower Sisters, is the story of Caroline Faraday's great aunt's fight to become a nurse during the Civil War and the family's fight against slavery, which was described by Kirkus Reviews as having historical verisimilitude worthy of a Ken Burns documentary, but oh, so much more lurid. Once she looked at the actual definition of lurid, she was very happy. She is currently working on 2 new books, a Cold War novel set in the 1950s and a super scary contemporary thriller set in her own house, which makes it very hard to sleep some nights. And it is my honor to welcome our author of the hour, to celebrate her latest work, Sunflower Sisters, Martha Hall Kelly. So I'm going to have Martha join me here on video. Just a moment. There she is.
Baby.
Hello! Good to see you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. I know I had to walk all the way up into my office.
Darn.
Yeah, so hard. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. How are you? How are things? And you're releasing your new novel. Congratulations.
It's crazy. I've never done it during COVID, so it's really an experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we got kind of a great summary from the introduction that we had there, but I'd love it if you could maybe tell us in your own words. I know we talked about Caroline Faraday's great aunt, but there are a lot more characters in this book. So maybe we can hear about the book from your perspective.
Oh, sure. Well, first I'm going to show you the cover.
Yes. Do you like it's gorgeous.
Oh, good. It's got shinies on it, which is really nice. I like to show there's no photographs in the hardcover, but there are pictures. This is the advanced reader copy that they send out to librarians and bookstores. And there are pictures in this. So I thought I'd show you just a couple of pictures.
Yes. Love a good show and tell.
It all started, I guess people know me best from Lilac Girls, and then which was about Caroline Faraday, as you explained so beautifully. So Caroline Faraday, she died in the mid 90s. Sadly, I never got to meet her. But when I was researching in the archives of the Bellamy Faraday house, her beautiful home that she called the Hay, I found all of her relatives that were down, well, not the actual relatives down in the archives, but all of their photographs and letters. They have archival boxes that keep the letters so beautifully preserved. And I was always curious where Caroline's wonderful philanthropy came from, because she brought those women to the United States that were so horribly experimented on. And her mom also had a really strong philanthropy streak. And I always wondered, where did that come from? So it turns out it came from Jane Eliza Woolsey. And I just want to show you a picture of her. And if I make it close enough, this is Jane Eliza. And I have more pictures on my website. And this is Mr. Woolsey. He died sadly when the children were young. He and Jane had 7 daughters. And then he was in a terrible steamship accident, and everyone perished at sea except 4 people. So he didn't survive. And his 7 daughters had to grow up without him. And Mrs. Woolsey was pregnant with a boy, which was the 8th child when he died, when Mr. Woolsey was in that accident. So it's a really tragic thing. But anyway, this is the daughters. That's Abby. She is the eldest. And I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about each of the sisters, because when you read the book, it's kind of not, it's not like Little Women that has 4 sisters. These are 7 sisters. So you kind of need a little bit of a cheat sheet. I have that on my website, actually, a family tree that tells you who everybody is. But anyway, Abby was the eldest, super, super smart. They all were really very, very smart, knew tons of languages. But Abby, I mean, today she probably would be a CEO of a company, because she was so organized. And during the war, she ran an enterprise in New York City. They all lived in New York City on Brevoort Place, which is today in the East Village. And Abby ran the women's industry, is what they called it. And the building is still there. And it was for people that were, down on their luck and didn't have work, and they could go there and sew for a living. And so Abby was a pretty amazing woman. And during the war, she turned their house into pretty much like the quartermaster's place. She was an incredible person. And this is Jane. She's the next daughter in line. And Jane was almost the complete opposite of Abby, both very smart, but Jane was way more high strung. She had bright red hair and loved fashion. Abby, the sisters used to make fun of her because she only wore one dress, a black dress, and she didn't feel any need to, wear anything else. But Jane dressed in jewel tones because her hair was so beautiful and loved jewelry. So Jane was, a different type altogether. This is Mary. Mary was married and had 4 children. She was married to a pastor, and his name was Howland, and Reverend Howland. And she was referred to by the rest of the family as the beauty of the family, which I don't think we would do that anymore. At least I wouldn't in my family. I just think that's really kind of tone deaf. But back in those days, I mean, she was the beauty, so they called her that. And she was a poet, an incredible poet. And sadly, she went viral with her poetry, and she was never allowed to say that it was her poetry, which is really sad. That's in the book. I know, it's so sad. Even until the day she died, she was never allowed, only men could write poetry. So people assumed it was written by a man. I know. And this is Eliza. She was married to another Howland. They were cousins of theirs. But of she was married to a really rich Howland, Joe, who went into the army and had a very high position and gets wounded very badly. But anyway, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but Eliza and her sister, Georgie's the main point of view character in Sunflower Sisters. And she and Eliza become nurses, and they go primarily their motivation was to be near Joe, Eliza's husband. But it turns out, you can't always decide where you're going to be. When you're a sanitary nurse, sanitary commission nurse, you're assigned to places, and they couldn't always be, so close to Joe. This is Hattie. Hattie's claim to fame was she was very, very close to Mrs. Woolsey, the mom. Those two were like, best friends. This is Carrie. Now, Carrie is Caroline's grandmother, not great grandmother. So, and she was the youngest and hated being the youngest because everybody would go off to, nurse soldiers at Gettysburg or wherever, and they would send things back to her. She was the only one at home, and they would send live ammunition. That was a thing back then. They would send a cannonball home that they found, crazy. I know nowadays we go, what? But she was so angry that the sisters were sending her live ammunition, and she used to take it into the backyard and just like leave it out there. And this is the son, Charles. He was the baby, and his feet did not touch the ground for the first 5 years he was born. They missed their father so much that, this was the man of the household. So anyway, that gives you a little primer about who all the characters are.
Yeah, it's a great genealogy lesson too. So I have to ask about your research process. You talked about going to Faraday's house, and how that sort of sparked that interest, and then diving into the rest of her family following this trilogy of books, I guess. They're all standalones, but this sort of lineage of your books. Where does your research process start, and how does it continue throughout your writing process?
Wow. Well, for Lilac Girls, it started kind of by accident. I went up to that house, which is a museum now. It's called the Bellamy Faraday House and Gardens. And I went up just because my husband, one Mother's Day, my mom had passed away and I really missed her. And my husband said, I'll take care of the kids. You go up there. It was about an hour drive. I know none of this would have happened without Michael. I need to remember that and be nicer to him. But he knew that I wanted to see it because it was in Victoria magazine at the time. It was a full spread that showed the house, which was so beautiful, this old colonial style house, very New England, and the lilacs, and my mother loved lilacs and I do too. So I thought, perfect. So I went up there and visited, and once I discovered the story, I saw the garden, went inside, and at the end, if you're ever in Connecticut, you have to go see the house because it's so beautiful and the tour is so great. They're actually opening in May 1st, which is really fun again. And then outside of Caroline's bedroom on the second floor, there's a landing, and her desk is there just as she left it, which is really very moving to see that, I think. And there was a photograph, among many other things. They were her big old Remington typewriter that, she used to fire off letters on. But there was a photograph, and I asked who these women were in the photograph. There were maybe 50 or so women. And the docent said, oh, those are the rabbits. They were women in Poland that were operated on at Ravensbrück concentration camp. And they were nicknamed the rabbits because they were experimented on. The Nazis gave them that nickname. And so she brought them to the US for rehabilitation and the trip of a lifetime. And all that if you've read Lilac Girls. But I was so fascinated with the story from the tour that I just started going down into the archives any chance I could and studying her. And no intention of writing a novel at all. I had written advertising. I had a journalism background. I didn't even think about writing a novel until I moved to Atlanta years later. And I went through the Starbucks drive-through and ordered my usual decaf cappuccino grande, and by mistake, the barista gave me a caffeinated one, and it all just started coming out. A Caroline chapter, like fully formed. It was very weird, and
So we need
so
to thank the Starbucks barista too in Atlanta.
yes, yes. If I only remembered who it was, but
Wow.
I really I can't drink caffeine because it makes me very like jumpy.
Thank
My family won't let me, to be honest, because I'm too crabby when I. But that day it worked. So
Wow.
after that, so that was a long period of research. So when my second book came around, um, I said, I told Random House I want to write two more, one about Caroline's mom and one about her grandma. And they said, great. So I did all the same things. I went to Russia to study, the Bolshevik Revolution and all of that. And now for this book, I did the same thing research wise, because with Lilac Girls, I had gone to Poland, I had gone to France and Germany, seen the concentration camp, and only that made it come alive, honestly. And so I thought, superstitiously, I'll do that for Lost Roses, go to Russia. And then for this book, I had to go to Maryland, where I set it, because Maryland was a border state and they had slavery up until the very end. I didn't realize that until I got into the history of it. Many of the other states were already slavery free, but not Maryland, because they were afraid that if Lincoln was afraid if he said to the border states, you cannot have slavery anymore, then they would secede and go with the rest of the states. So anyway, and I spent a lot of time at the Gettysburg, on the Gettysburg battlefield too, which a little bit of a spoiler, Georgie ends up there being a nurse. I mean, a big part of the book, you don't know if she's actually going to be a nurse. So I shouldn't really talk about it, but I kind of have to, because first of all, maybe some of the people in the audience have already read it. And it's important to talk about Gettysburg, I think, just because it's such a national treasure. When you walk around there, it's hallowed ground. So yeah,
I love that. I love how visceral your research process is about like being there and so that you can incorporate all the senses and everything too. I want to ask about flowers in your books, and I want to ask about the titles. Is there research that comes into flowers? How does that theme work in your books, and where did that start?
Well, the first one, I'm trying to see where my sunflowers are. I must, oh, there they are, over
On your shirt.
on my shirt and behind me. I originally titled Lilac Girls, The Rabbits of Ravensbrook. And by some fluke, I was talking to my editor. I was living in Atlanta at the time, and said, oh, it's such a shame I can't grow lilacs in Atlanta because they need a harsh winter in order to bloom. And she said, oh, that's just like the girls. They needed a harsh something in order to kind of bloom on their own. So let's call it Lilac Girls. And at the time, I was not 100% on board, but I love it now, especially because people bring me lilacs, and it's nice to have that kind of motif. So with Lost Roses, I thought, the Tsarina loved white roses. So I thought, roses might be kind of perfect for that. And then with this book, I really thought, oh no, what's a Civil War flower? But then I discovered that the sunflower had a very special meaning in the Underground Railroad. And I can't tell you what that meaning is, but yeah, so that was like from heaven
Yeah,
sent,
perfect.
because that worked out great.
No, that's wonderful to hear too, because it's something that travels through your books, like the lineage of these women. And another thing that's in these books is female friendships and female relationships. And I want to ask about the importance of those in your stories and the value that you feel as an author bringing those to light in literature. Can you talk a little bit more about female relationships in general in your books?
I think that it's something that doesn't get written about enough, at least when I first started. And, it's funny, as a writer, I think we just write what we want to write. I never set out to write about female relationships. It's just, I have two sisters. I write about sisters a lot. I've always had like one really best friend. So I think it was just kind of natural in each of the books when I look back on it. And people bring it up, like you are bringing it up now. And they say, you always do that. You always write about female friendships. But I didn't know at the time that I was doing that. Like I gave Caroline Faraday Betty, who is this wonderful, it's just, I don't know, I like giving my protagonists a best friend. And oftentimes they're having to deal with finding a best friend. So maybe I have like friend issues or something. I don't know. It's possible.
I don't
But
think issues necessarily, because
maybe though,
you put such relatable ones in there. You know what I mean? Like you said, it is something that isn't written about nearly enough in that way. But I love that you track it throughout history as if this is something that has been cherished and recorded by women. It's something that we've known for a very long time. But I'm curious also about the other women in the novel, right? You have this whole other side. It's not a beeline story. I don't like calling it that because it really runs parallel. But you have this other side of the story. And I want to talk a little bit about, where did that inspiration hit, being a
oh, with Gemma.
spy? Yes, I'm sorry, with Jenna.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Now, Gemma has a best friend. She goes through a whole thing with, she wants a best friend so desperately. And then, well, I can't talk about that too much, but yeah, I love that storyline. I mean, she's an enslaved girl on a plantation and she just wants a friend. And it's just, I don't know, I get teary even talking about this, but the reason that I did that storyline is because the Woolseys, were abolitionists, and Mrs. Woolsey, the mom, was she grew up on a slaveholding plantation in Virginia and always hated slavery. So when she had her own children, she brought them up as staunch abolitionists, as she was. But the father had been a sugar merchant, which of course, they made their fortune on the backs of slaves. So I think they were tortured by that. And in their letters, I read all of their letters, which are down in the archives. And that's one thing that they talk about. So I put that into the book. But anyway, back to Gemma. The reason I always have three characters, or at least I did in those three books. And I knew I wanted an enslaved character. And I felt like I also needed, in order to really show the horrors of slavery, I needed to have a plantation mistress as well. And I thought that would be, very interesting dynamic. And then, of course, Georgie gets to know these two people as well. So that's why I set it at Sauterley, which is, it's called Peeler Plantation in the book, but Sauterley Plantation in Maryland is a tobacco plantation, now a museum that you can go visit. Very, very cool place. They have renovated and preserved the cabin where the enslaved people would sleep, which is just fabulous. And the whole place is just, it's right on the Patuxent River, which is amazing. But anyway, once I visited there, Anne May just came alive, and so did Gemma. Kind of like when I went with Lilac Girls to Germany and went to Ravensbrück, I felt like once I got there, Herta Oberhauser just kind of came alive. And the same thing was true walking around that house on the hill, the manor house where Anne May, the plantation mistress, lived. It was just like scenes coming at me. I just had to channel it and write it down. But yeah, I love the dichotomy of those two characters, and they get into this weird kind of symbiotic relationship because Anne May never learned to write. And Gemma reads and writes because Aunt Tandy Rose, who left the plantation to Anne May's young, she's only in her 20s. And Aunt Tandy Rose taught Gemma how to read and write because she was a house slave. And Gemma would read her, it was purely for Aunt Tandy Rose's benefit, but she would read her racy novels. And so, Gemma has, it's a real benefit that she can read and write, but it also is dangerous because back then, it was against the law. So she gets into some trouble because of it. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, she does.
For Gemma, yeah.
What you were talking about your three characters, and so in relationships and female relationships in particular, but I want to take that back to the writing process of how do you balance those three voices and those multiple storylines to create this book for us? What does that process look like for you?
Do you want to see really what it looks like? I can show you. I
would love that, and I think our viewers would too. A show and tell. This is the best part of virtual events.
I love show and tell. Um, well, when I first started writing Lilac Girls, it took me a really long time. It took me like 10 years. I didn't think anyone was going to want to read it anyway. So I think I wasn't in that much of a hurry. But I part of it was I didn't have an outline. So you know how they say there's pantsers by the seat of your pants, or um, whatever this is,
Plotter,
outliners.
plotters, and
Plotters, yes, plotters and pantsers. Thank you. Um, so once I read somewhere that you're supposed to do an outline, or it's helpful. And so once I did it for Lilac Girls, I was hooked, and I did it for every book. So I think this is the Sunflower Sisters one. Yeah, I don't know if you can see, but it's pretty detailed. I don't know if that's the beginning or the end, but see, it's got dates. And then each of the different, I know it's crazy. Now that I'm looking at this, it's a little obsessive. A little, but
no,
each
it's
one,
beautiful. This is where I'm
like,
at. It's
I think
gorgeous.
this is one character, and it's April, May, June. Yeah. So that way I know what's happening, and I do write chronologically, but I know what's happening at the end. Oh, I don't want to spoil it. Oh yeah,
We
there's
can't read
spoilers.
it. It's okay.
If you have supersonic, if
Vision.
you've got really good eyes, that would be a spoiler. But yeah. So once I figured out how to do that, it was almost written by the time I go to take those scenes. It's kind of, I don't know, my security blanket, because now I know that it's going to be exciting and fun, and there's enough stuff going on. Um, Instead of, I don't know how people write when they don't know the ending and they're just kind of going on. It works for a lot of people. So it's just not the way I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I did that.
How's been the change moving from taking 10 years for Lilac Girls to being on a deadline with the other two? What's that transition been like for you?
You ask such good questions. It's
Sorry,
good
I
now.
guess. You're welcome.
No, you're amazing. It's good now. My Lost Roses, there's that whole sophomore novel thing. And I think, they bought that book and this book without seeing a manuscript. So I'm sure they were worried. I would be. I mean, I was like, can I do this again? But it was so great when I delivered that manuscript. I think they were just so happy. And then with this too, and my agent said, "Oh, it seems like this was so easy for you to write this one." And I was like, "This was the hardest one, because all the letter I had almost." I don't want to say too much information, but there were so many letters that I didn't know what to put in, because with three point of view characters, Georgie, Caroline's great aunt, the one that becomes a nurse, she's just one character. Like if I had the whole book, I could put everything in. So I think with this book, it was more what are the most important things to put in. So, and then you have to juggle that with what the other characters are doing. So
No,
yeah, I really needed an outline.
I don't think you had a sophomore slump or a sophomore book. I loved Lost Roses still. It was still really great. I have a weird fascination with Russian history, so I really enjoyed it.
Oh,
But
good.
I thought it was great. And I love hearing though about your progression as a writer, because I know that we have a lot of aspiring published writers. I say it that way because everybody's a writer if they write. And aspiring authors to publish work. So it's nice to get sort of a human view and a physical show and tell of the amount of work it takes, the amount of thought that you put into it. So thank you for that honesty. I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions before we turn it over to audience Q&A. So
Okay.
there's a chat next to the screen that you're watching us on that some of you have already been active in. So you can chat your questions there. And I've got a second screen here so I can direct them right to Martha when it comes time for that. So I want to ask you about the genre shift that you're making here with your scary book, your horror novel, your thriller that you're working on. What inspired that shift in you as a writer? And do you think that there'll be more of that in your career?
Wow. Well, when I finished Sunflower Sisters, or actually before that, I went back to Random House and said, okay, here are the books that I want to write. And they've been so amazing. They always say, or so far they have, say, yeah, you need to write what you want to write. So that's a dream. So what I approached them on was I wanted to do a book about the Cold War, because I was really fascinated with Operation Paperclip. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's when they brought the Nazi scientists to the United States to work on several different government projects. And it was all very secret, and perhaps those people would have been better off if they had tried them and executed a lot of them. They were Nazis that did terrible things. But anyway, I won't get into it right now, but I've always been really interested in that. And so I said, I want to write not a follow-up to Lilac Girls, but it has some of the same characters. Like Binns is in it. I don't know if you remember Binns.
Yes.
Good old Binns, and Hurt Oberhauser. But it's about two women, one American, because there were several Americans at Ravensbrück. One actually made her own, you know how they had the little triangles? She made one and wrote USA on it. So when I saw that, I was like, I need her for my character for this book. And then the other friend, there we go with the friends again. Who knew?
You find what works.
Yeah. And what I love writing. They're two best friends that survive Ravensbrück, and a bad doctor there did something really bad to each of them, something different, but they hunt him down across the world. And it's so, I mean, I'm just getting a chill. So I said, that's the book I want to write. And they said, great. And so that's the next one. And then the one after that, I guess that would be number 5, is a thriller. I love thrillers. And I've just always really wanted to write a thriller. So I was really lucky that they said, yeah, that would be great. And every time I go out, or I used to, back pre-COVID, I would say, this is what I'm doing. And I thought that my readers would go like, we only want historical fiction, but they all go, yes, 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 we want that. So it's fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's fun to write a contemporary novel, although I do love writing. The other one is about the 1950s and the fashion and the clothes. I mean, it's just so fun to write that. But yeah, so far so good. It's really, really fun.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that there's more coming from you, and you all once again can get your copies of Sunflower Sisters at tatteredcover.com. I'm telling you, if you were a fan of any of her books beforehand, you need to read it. And if not, just this is a good one to start too. It might be fun. I'd be interested to see a reader that starts with Sunflower Sisters and works her way forward in time rather than back. That would be really interesting.
I know. They did that with Lost Roses and really liked doing that.
Yeah, I'm interested. So if I guess tweet at us or something, or let us know at Tattered Cover if that's the way that you're going to read these. But that being said, I have a couple questions here from the audience that we're going to take. And so please keep them coming, everybody. So will your next book be told from multiple points of view as well?
Oh, wow. No, just 2. My agent would not allow me to do 3 points of view. She's like, Martha, you need to try something different. And actually, I really like doing 2 point of view characters. It's really, it's just something different, and it still is really fun, and it keeps everything moving along. From Rome to Paris to Vienna to South America. It's really, I haven't been able to travel as none of us have been. So I feel like I've just been doing my travel, in my head, and it's really been great. It's a lifesaver.
We're all reading so much more this time, because we're vicariously traveling through that or watching The Amazing Race, which were my 2 vices.
I didn't watch The Amazing Race. No, maybe I need to.
It's just so I could see all the places, you know what I mean, and pretend I was going to them. And all the seasons are on Hulu. Yes to some multiple points of view, but not 3. Then you said 2.
Yes, just 2. And then in the last book, the thriller is just from 1 point of view.
What? Look at you breaking all the rules.
I know.
I like this next question here, which is, you said you love thrillers. Can you recommend any to us?
Oh my God. I've been reading all the kind of famous ones, like The Woman in the Window and The Silent The liked both of those. Actually, I'm just finishing up The The Woman in the Window on Audible. I love Audible books because I can go out and walk. And sometimes, though, I just like find myself in a place where I don't know where I am because I've just been walking and listening to these books. But I'm going back and reading some really old thrillers. And things just like scary books. Like I picked up In Cold Blood the other day, and
Love that.
that I it scared me too much though. I do draw the line at, being not being able to sleep at night. But yeah, so I haven't been that creative. If you can tell me any good ones in the chat, I would love that.
Yes,
I
please
need to
recommend in the
know.
chat, and I can always get you a list too. Books, that's what booksellers are for.
Yay, that would be great. And what I'm writing is not a pure thriller, like my agent keeps saying. It's not really a thriller. It's a lot like a Scary or Big Little Lies. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
That's
But
a really good log line for you too. Just it's like Scary or Big Little Lies. That's a solid pitch there too.
okay,
Awesome.
now that you like that, I'm going to use it.
You've got bookseller approval. Here's a really good one. Where do you recommend that aspiring authors start when it comes to their research?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, we need 2 hours in order to chat about this whole thing. No one ever asked me, like aspiring writers never ask me stuff. I don't know why, but that's great. I know. And I try to like make my kids do things and they're like, no, we're not doing that.
We'll host a workshop. I'm just at this point, I'm going to be like, I'm going to take Martha Hall Kelly for like a workshop and we'll do like a writing how-to.
I would love that. Okay, so the question was research. How do you start research?
For aspiring authors, where do you recommend that they start their research process?
Okay, first of all, it depends on what you want to write. Do you want to write commercial fiction and try and get an agent and get it published by a big publisher? Or, it really depends. Or do you want to just write for yourself? But I'm assuming that you want to write commercially. Then I say you need an idea first. You may have that already. Make sure it's a saleable one if you want to sell your work, because what people don't realize, or I certainly didn't, there are things that agents are looking for. And if you fall into that, that's great. But otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of time writing something that just isn't saleable. How do you know if it's saleable? I think the best thing to do is look at Publishers Weekly and Publishers Lunch. Yes, you're saying yes, because that shows you every day what has sold. And you can go, oh, it looks like this is selling. Not that, I don't want people to think that I'm saying you should write in order to make money necessarily, but if that's what you want to do, then it has to be a saleable thing, because I'd hate to see you spending a lot of time on something that isn't saleable. And then once you have that, like if you want to write historical fiction, for example, make sure you have something very interesting that nobody else knows about. And just, maybe it's something in your area, maybe it's something not necessarily in your family, but maybe, and like become the expert on that. And that way, once you write your novel, you can query an agent and say, hey, I am the expert on this little known gold mine that blah, blah, blah. So I think that is kind of a little known thing. Do you agree? So once you have that,
definitely. Yeah.
And that's yours. Like with me, it was Carolyn Faraday and the house and all of that. And then you can really research. And I think you'll know at that point where you should go.
Yeah.
You can get it online. You can get it at libraries. It just depends on what your little niche is. And now I really am excited for you to do this.
No, and I think that for people too, your advice earlier about the visceral, if you have the means in which to visit these places that you're researching, whether it's, a cemetery down the road or Poland or something, if you have the means to do that, maybe that's a trip or an investment you make, because there's nothing quite like being there. And that it was able, I would argue, that gave you a leg up when writing, because you were able to transport us there as well.
Huge, because when you query, I mean, I didn't even know what that was, but when you send out your little, you get this much space to send out an email to an agent. If you can say, I've gone here and there studying this, then they definitely give you, they'll read it at least, because really what you're trying to do is just get them to read it. And that's hard because, you know, they're busy. So yeah, now I honestly am so excited for whoever asked that question, because I want them to get started.
Yay! That's your impetus. Get started. Write that manuscript. Put the pen to paper. Button seat. That's your inspiration. Martha Hall Kelly just gave you inspiration right there and said, "Go do it."
It's not, you don't have to be a writer already. I used to think, oh, you have to be like James Patterson in order to write a book. You really, really don't. But you do have to have something that is, you know, that gets an editor or an agent going, oh,
A
that
little
sounds,
bit excited. Yep.
yeah.
I like this question too of, do you ever feel restricted by historical events, and where do you find your creative freedom when writing historical fiction?
Where do I find my creative freedom when writing historical fiction?
I think it's along the lines of like, do you feel, you know, because you've got historical events and timelines that you have to follow, you know, do you
Yeah.
find flexibility between those moments and, you know, developing
Yeah,
character
that's really
dialogue? How does that
interesting.
work for you?
I do feel restricted. Like with this book, I thought, are people going to expect a ton of battles and things? And I just decided early on, I'm not doing that. I don't like, that's why I hated history when I was younger in school. It was all about the dates and the battles and the cannons. And, you know, I wanted it, there is a battle scene in it, but it's a very interesting scene vis-a-vis the character that's in that scene, a woman in a battle scene. I think, you know, that made it more interesting. But I do feel restricted by events, definitely. But what I've learned to do is just write my timeline and then say, okay, what was happening at that time? What can be my backdrop for what's happening with the characters? Because I think that is what really, and that is the freedom that I think you're asking about. I just write the book that I want to write and then kind of work backwards to find, okay, we'll set that during the Battle of Bull Run or whatever. And I think that works, that so far has worked really well, because I've written every book during, there's a battle or a war as a backdrop. So
There
it
is.
helps.
Sorry, I
Yes.
just thought of that. I was like, for studying of questions and in conversation, I was noticing themes and you know, the flower titles, and I was like, duh, the battles would have been one to bring up. But anyway, next time.
But you know, it's not that big of a part of the books or the plots as much. It's just kind of to give you context as a reader, this is what's happening at the time.
Yeah, it's a framing.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I'm thoroughly enjoying myself, Martha, and I cannot thank you enough for this conversation. I'm going to ask you one more question before we end here tonight. And this is
Okay.
one that we love to end our events on here at Tattered Cover, so you can interpret it as you will. But what did this book, Sunflower Sisters, teach you?
Oh my God. That's such a good question to end on. It taught me, well, first of all, I didn't know anything about the Civil War when I started, and I love starting from that point because I figure I kind of assume that other people don't as well, which is not always true, of course. But I I learned that we didn't learn that much from the Civil War, unfortunately, and it makes me really, really, really sad. Because I just kept seeing things in my research and thinking, oh my God, that's exactly what's happening now. And, you know, the gulf between the two sides in our country is so, so wide. It's almost like I don't know how to bring everybody together, how that will happen. And that's exactly what was happening during the Civil War. And it was all because of what was happening with people of color. It was because of slavery. So it's really, it's kind of interesting that we've come full circle now. And that's what I learned. There's a scene in the book that takes place during the draft riots in New York City. And it was basically an insurrection that took place because this mostly Irish mob was upset because they were being drafted and rich people didn't have to go fight. They could pay $300 to get out of it. And of course, the freed Black men were working on the docks as longshoremen and taking their jobs. And they were just in a panic about it. And they didn't feel like they should have to go die when it wasn't equal. And so, but as a result, they tore down New York City for 5 days, basically, and they murdered Black men. 4 Black men were lynched in New York City, and a child. It was just such a horrible thing. But using violence instead of more peaceful ways to go about things, it turns out it's a long history of it in our country. So yeah, I got a front row seat to all of that while I was researching.
Wow. And thank you for reminding us about where the world was so that we can previously learn from our history, hopefully, but also thank you for this wonderful book. I liked all 3 of your books. I really enjoyed this one as well in the same level. And I know that our viewers will as well. So make sure you get your copies of Sunflower Sisters by Miss Martha Hall Kelly here. The links are down in the description below on the video. You can always find it at tatteredcover.com as well. Martha, thank you for this amazing conversation. I want to give you the chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else that you want to say before this evening is up.
You can find me at marthahallkelly.com and on Facebook and Twitter. And I just started TikTok. My daughter blew up on TikTok. She's at Mayor Kel. She does mouth acting. I don't know if you've seen her.
Yeah, it's probably. Crazy.
It's crazy. So anyway, she got me on TikTok. I think I have 9 followers. I know, don't be jealous. 9 whole followers.
I don't have a TikTok. I just watch. So you have more than me.
So you can find me on TikTok, all 3 posts. But yeah, I just hope everybody enjoys the book. And I'd love to hear from you. I'm all over the place, Goodreads, and I will write you back.
Yes, I love hearing that from an author. She wants your thriller recommendations, people. That's what we're looking for at this moment. So, and once again, you can get your copies of Sunflower Sisters at tatteredcover.com or at any one of our locations. We have signed copies, so you want to get them from us, which is very exciting. So thank you guys again for joining us. Check out tatteredcover.com/events for all of our future and upcoming events that we have. You can register for those. Martha, if you'll stay with me here while I end us out tonight. My name is McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore. For some of you out there, it is dinner time, and I suggest that you maybe order from a local mom and pop restaurant. Shopping locally, keeping your money in your city is more beneficial than you know. It's the reason that we're all still here right now, able to serve you in our community. So we say thank you for being here. Until next time, everybody, stay safe and happy reading. Bye, everybody.